The first time I stepped onto the Frostmaw Tundra, the cold did not feel like any ordinary cold. It moved with purpose, probing beneath my clothes, sinking into my bones as though searching for a hidden entrance into the deepest chambers of my mind. I remember thinking it was only the wind, that any strangeness I felt was my own nerves echoing back at me. I was wrong, of course, wrong in ways I could not yet imagine. But then again, no one truly understands Frostmaw until it has already taken something from them. I wasn't supposed to be traveling alone. The others had turned back at the last outpost, muttering rumors they insisted were only warnings. Old stories told by the hunters who refused to cross the boundary where the black pines ended. They tried to frame it as local superstition, nothing more, but the fear in their eyes betrayed them. I watched them leave, forcing myself not to feel abandoned, not to feel small. I had come for answers, and answers rarely waited for the timid. The tundra stretched ahead like a white, silent ocean. The sky a flat, dull gray that felt too close, too low. No sun, no moon, only a light that existed without a source. Cast no shadows. I didn't understand then how wrong that was, how deeply unnatural. I trudged forward with my pack, following the vague instructions I had written on a half-frozen scrap of paper. The rumors said there were ruins beneath the snow, remnants of a settlement that existed before maps, older than any of the surviving clans. I had come because I believed knowledge lived there, answers to questions I had never said aloud. The cold deepened as I walked. It pressed against my skull, throbbed behind my eyes, and seeped into my tongue until my breath tasted like metal. My thoughts felt sharper, but not in a way that helped me. It reminded me of a blade held too close to the skin, the edge whispering threats. I told myself it was fatigue, the monotony of the landscape playing tricks on me. But as the hours stretched, I realized something else. The silence was growing heavier. It wasn't the normal kind of quiet you find in lonely places. It felt active, as though it was listening. The worst part was how quickly I grew used to it. I rested only once that first day, sitting on my pack while the wind brushed against me. My gloves were stiff with frost, and though I flexed my fingers inside them repeatedly, the numbness only increased. When I reached into my coat for the compass, the metal stuck to my glove for a moment, as if trying to take hold. I forced my fingers away and examined the needle. It spun lazily, refusing to settle. That, too, I tried to rationalize. Magnetic interference, faulty equipment, anything but the idea that the land itself rejected orientation. As I set off again, I became aware of an odd impression, like someone walking just behind my left shoulder. Every time I turned, the emptiness mocked me. Yet the feeling persisted, an invisible presence pacing me with patient, unhurried steps. I talked aloud just to prove to myself that I still could, though the sound of my voice felt swallowed, absorbed by the air before it traveled more than a foot. I told myself that if I kept moving, I'd find something, landmarks, ruins, signs of a path. But the tundra offered nothing. By the second day, I stopped checking the compass entirely. It was useless. I navigated by instinct or maybe desperation. The cold had settled inside me, not simply chilling but hollowing me out. Each exhale felt thinner than the last, as though my breath was losing substance. My emotions began fading at the edges too, softening like ink left in snow. I noticed but didn't react as strongly as I should have. That should have alarmed me. Instead, I continued forward with a kind of mechanical determination. Purpose without passion. Motion without thought. Near dusk, if it could be called dusk in this lightless place, I stumbled upon the first sign that I was not the only soul wandering the tundra. It was a shape half buried in snow, something roughly human. My heart should have raced, but the cold muted the instinct. I approached slowly, pulling the object free with gloved hands. Snow fell away from a sculpted face frozen in a perfect, lifelike expression. Not stone, not ice, but flesh preserved in some unnatural state. The eyes were open, their pupils a clouded gray. The lips were parted slightly, as if caught mid-breath. A living statue, they called them. Travelers who lingered too long in the Frostmaw, not dead but emptied. Emotionless, present but unreachable. I brushed more snow aside and revealed the figure's hand, curled inward as if gripping something that had long since vanished. A moment later, I noticed the rise and fall of the chest, slow, rhythmic, barely perceptible. The person was alive. My stomach twisted. For a brief second, fear tried to claw its way up, but the cold swallowed it, smoothing it into a dull echo. I should have run then. Everything in me, everything that was still human, knew that staying near the figure was dangerous. The stories said that the Frostmaw spread its stillness through proximity, that the statues served as warnings for what awaited those who tarried. I left the figure behind, unsure whether I was fleeing from it or from the version of myself that might someday look just like that. That night, I dreamed with my eyes open. At least that's what it felt like. The sky pulsated faintly, as though something behind it was breathing. I heard whispers beneath the snow, voices speaking in a language without sound. They threaded through my thoughts effortlessly, like cold water through cracked stone. When I finally blinked and realized I had been standing in place for who knows how long, my legs were stiff, my skin numb. I checked my watch, its hands spun meaninglessly. Time here had no anchor. By the third day, the presence behind me had multiplied. I felt 2 shapes, then 3, gliding silently as though tethered to my shadow. My emotions dwindled further. I felt nothing when I lost the last of my food to the wind, the wrapper slipping from my fingers and drifting away like a dead leaf. I felt nothing when I realized I had bitten through the inside of my cheek without noticing until I tasted warmth. Even that warmth faded quickly. It wasn't until I collapsed that I realized how deep the cold had burrowed. Not just into the body, into the mind. It wasn't killing me. It was changing me. I remember lying there in the snow, staring at the blank sky, unable to decide whether to stand or simply let the tundra consume me. Decision required emotion, and mine were unraveling with each breath. I tried to force myself to feel something, fear, anger, anything. Nothing came. Then I heard the sound, a single crack like ice splitting, but it came from beneath me. The ground shifted, and I slid downward, snow cascading around me as the crust gave way. I tumbled into darkness, landing on something hard and flat. For a moment I didn't move. Then I lifted my head and saw faint blue light shimmering along the walls of what appeared to be a cavern carved from ice far older than anything I knew. The air was colder here, not in temperature, but in presence, as though the cold was aware of me. I stood slowly, my breath forming intricate crystalline patterns that lingered too long in the air before dissolving. The cavern stretched forward, illuminated by pulsing veins of pale light embedded in the ice. They flickered like a heartbeat. I followed them. My footsteps echoed, though not normally. The sound came back distorted, as though the cavern repeated my steps a fraction of a second too late, mimicking me with deliberate intent. A strange comfort settled into me. Not warmth, but clarity. The cold here didn't fight me. It guided me. Eventually the passage widened into a hollow chamber. In the center stood a mass of ice shaped vaguely like a throne, though it had no defined edges. It seemed formed by pressure, by centuries of cold compressing itself into density. On the throne, if that's what it was, sat another figure. This one was not frozen in the same way as the others. It was upright, its head tilted slightly forward, its hands resting on its knees. Frost clung to its skin like a second layer, shimmering faintly. When I stepped closer, its eyes opened. They were colorless, empty, reflective like mirrors. I waited for fear, for instinct. None came. The figure stood. The ice around its body cracked and reformed with each movement, as though it was less a person and more a construct of frost wearing a human shape. When it stepped toward me, the air tightened, pulling the breath from my lungs. I didn't step back. I didn't even think of stepping back. It reached out with a hand shaped perfectly, unervingly, like my own. And then it spoke. Its voice not a voice but a vibration inside my chest, a resonance that bypassed sound entirely. You belong to the quiet. I don't know how I understood the words. They bypassed language, settling straight into the place where emotion used to be. The figure's hand hovered inches from my face. I felt the cold reaching forward, searching for a final purchase inside me. And for the first time in days, something flickered inside my mind. Something faint, weak, but unmistakably alive. I stepped back. The cavern groaned. The figure tilted its head as though studying me. The cold shivered in the air, displeased. "You are not ready." The ground beneath my feet cracked. I fell again, this time upward impossibly, as though the world inverted itself. Snow engulfed me, and I burst out onto the surface with a gasp that felt like tearing through a wall. I lay on the tundra, the wind screaming over me, but something had changed. The cold inside me pulsed, no longer hollow but tethered to something deeper. A bond formed, a mark set, and I realized, with a sudden clarity sharper than any emotion, the Frostmaw hadn't failed to claim me. It had chosen to wait. Woke to the whisper of the wind, its voice no longer harsh, but coaxing, almost intimate. My body ached, and yet the cold inside me throbbed with a curious vitality, like a heartbeat in the hollow. I tried to sit, but the tundra's surface felt alive, shifting slightly beneath my hands. I realized then that I was not merely on the snow, I was part of it, or at least the Frostmaw believed I should be. I tested a finger, pressing it into the frost, and the ice recoiled slightly, as though curious. For hours I crawled forward, dragging my pack, but I felt no fatigue in the traditional sense. Hunger was distant, thirst a memory fading under layers of numbness. My emotions had returned in fragments, but they were distorted. Fear was a dull weight, sadness a distant echo, and hope was a brittle shard I didn't know how to hold. I kept walking because it felt right, not because any rational part of me demanded it. The landscape changed subtly, though only a careful observer might notice. Snow drifts were taller here, warped by unseen currents. Trees, blackened and skeletal, leaned toward me, their branches outstretched like silent witnesses. Shadows pooled unnaturally beneath them, though the sky offered no sun to cast such darkness. And still, always, the whispering wind accompanied me, shaping the cold into patterns I couldn't decipher. By the fourth day, I came upon a stretch of frozen river, its surface cracked into intricate lattices. The ice seemed thin, yet solid, shimmering as if alive. I peered into the depths and saw shapes moving beneath the surface. Something between fish and shadow, flickering in and out like fragmented thoughts. I stepped forward cautiously, and the ice groaned beneath me. A voice, a real one this time, mine own, echoed back in distortion. "Do not trust the reflection." I froze, staring at the distorted reflection of my face. My eyes stared back at me, but they were not mine. They were empty, gray mirrors reflecting nothing but the void inside. The cold surged, as though offended that I lingered too long. I tore my gaze away and continued, my footsteps careful, deliberate. I didn't want to become like the statues I had seen. Not yet. The fifth day brought another companion. I was rounding a bend when I saw her. An old woman hunched, dragging a wooden staff through the snow. She was clothed in furs, but they were tatters, dusted with frost that glimmered unnaturally. Her eyes were closed, and yet I felt them on me, penetrating. I tried to call out, but my voice cracked halfway, and when she opened her eyes, I wished I had stayed silent. Her pupils were a flat, reflective gray, the same as the figure in the cavern. And yet, she smiled. Or rather, the corners of her mouth twitched in some semblance of the expression humans call a smile. "You walk too fast," she said. Her voice was hoarse, scraping against the edges of the cold. "The Frostmaw doesn't need to chase. It waits." "I'm looking for something," I said, unsure if I meant the ruins, the knowledge, or simply a reason to keep walking. "Looking makes you heavy. The Frostmaw prefers those light enough to vanish." I frowned. I didn't understand, but I nodded anyway. The woman shuffled past me, leaving footprints that filled with snow instantly, erasing her path. I followed, though my steps were hesitant. Somehow, despite her frailty, she moved with certainty, unbothered by the terrain. The wind seemed to part for her, carrying her presence forward like a current in a frozen sea. We walked for what felt like hours without a word. And then I noticed something horrifying. My reflection in the frozen river nearby no longer matched my movements. My image lagged by a second or two, like a puppet being manipulated by invisible strings. Panic surged faintly, almost foreign in its intensity. I looked to the old woman. She observed me carefully, her gray eyes unreadable. "They are patient," she whispered. "They watch everything, even what you think is hidden." Before I could ask what she meant, the wind shifted violently. Snow whipped around us, forming shapes, twisting into the semblance of bodies. I stumbled backward, arms raised to shield myself. The shapes coalesced, figures entirely of frost, humanoid yet grotesque, their limbs unnaturally long. Their faces were voids, hollow and smooth, but I knew they were watching, judging, waiting. The old woman stepped forward calmly, tapping her staff against the snow. The figures froze, then dissipated into mist. She turned to me, her breath visible despite the cold. "First test," she said simply. "If you cannot withstand fear, you will remain a statue. Nothing more." I swallowed hard, feeling the first real tremor of emotion since entering the tundra. Fear, sharp and raw, pierced the hollow inside me. It burned, but it also awakened something, awareness perhaps, or life. We continued. The wind seemed less aggressive now, almost guiding us. And yet, every time I glanced at my reflection in the ice, it moved slightly differently, a subtle divergence that gnawed at my mind. Was it teaching me? Mocking me? I didn't know. The old woman only said, "They are not what you fear. They are what you can become if you stop fighting." By the 6th day, the landscape changed again. Snow gave way to jagged black ice, slick and jagged. I slipped several times, my knees scraping the frozen surface. My body ached, but the hollowness had lessened, replaced by a peculiar resilience. I began to notice things. Faint patterns in the snow, the way the wind whispered in sequences almost like language, the way shadows moved contrary to the lightless sky. The tundra wasn't just cold, it was alive, thinking, testing. At dusk, we came upon the ruins, or what remained of them. Walls carved from ice and stone, shattered structures half buried in snow. The air was heavier here, pressing down on my shoulders with oppressive weight. The old woman stopped at the threshold. "Do you see them?" she asked. I squinted. At first, I saw nothing but broken walls. Then I noticed shapes inside the ruins. Figures, countless, frozen mid-action, some reaching, some collapsing. They were travelers, scholars, hunters, all caught by the Frostmaw's patience. Some had faces I could not identify, others looked like me. I felt the hollowness stir, a warning inside me. My pulse throbbed faintly, almost unfamiliar. "Do not linger," the old woman said. "You have passed the first tests, but this is the heart." I hesitated. Something urged me forward, even though every instinct screamed to flee. The figures seemed to stretch infinitely into the ruins, a frozen city captured in ice. The wind whispered through the cracks in the walls, a symphony of lost voices, urging me, beckoning. I entered. The cold here was different. It was deliberate, targeted. It crept inside me, probing for weakness, brushing against the remnants of my fading emotions. I shivered, but the sensation was almost electric, awakening the part of me that had felt fear, curiosity, and a faint, stubborn hope. I realized then, the Frostmaw wasn't just a cold. It was a teacher, a predator, a sculptor of minds. Those who lingered too long became statues, yes, but it was not cruelty alone. It was refinement, a way to separate the strong from the weak, the adaptable from the fragile. Hours or maybe days passed. Time had no meaning here. I wandered among the statues, examining the frozen expressions, noting the subtle differences. Some faces twisted in agony, others serene, others blank, empty, like my reflection had once been. I felt a strange kinship with them. I understood, finally, what the old woman had meant. This place was a mirror, a crucible. I pressed forward deeper into the ruins, the cold guiding my steps. And then I saw it. The throne, larger and more imposing than the caverns, carved entirely from black ice. On it sat a figure whose presence seemed to radiate cold like sunlight radiates heat. Its eyes were mirrors, reflecting my own hollow gaze. The air vibrated with the resonance of thought, not sound. "You have come far," it said. The voice was not a voice. It was certainty, absolute and unyielding. "Few endure even this long. The Frostmaw has tested patience, fear, endurance. Now it tests will." I stepped forward. My hollowed emotions flared briefly: fear, defiance, a pulse of something primal. The cold surged, seeking to fill the hollow again, to mold me, to claim me entirely. I resisted. Every ounce of will I had left focused, shimmering like a fragile flame against the void. "Will," it said again, "is the last barrier." And then the ice around the throne cracked, and I understood fully. The Frostmaw was not merely a place, not merely a cold. It was intelligence, deliberate and patient. And I, for the first time since entering its domain, felt alive. I stood there, inches away from the frozen throne, the air between us thick with unspoken challenges. The Frostmaw had claimed the land, yes, but now it wanted me, wanted my will to either submit or break. The mirror-eyed figure on the throne did not move, but I could feel its gaze like a weight pressing on my chest, sapping the warmth from my bones. "Will," the word echoed again, not in sound but in vibration, resonating deep within the marrow of my body. My pulse quickened in response, though it was a muted, distant thing, as if my heart had learned to beat without the warmth of blood. I tried to steady my breath, but the air felt thin here, drawn tighter, colder, like something had squeezed the very life out of it. "Do you fear this test?" the figure asked, and the question hung between us like a challenge I could not escape. The cold pressed harder. I felt it more keenly now, as though it had been waiting for this moment to sink deeper into me, to root itself into my thoughts, my feelings, my very soul. I wanted to turn away, to flee from this place, but I knew I couldn't. Not without losing something irreparably. Had already come too far. The Frostmaw had begun to rewrite me, to carve out parts of who I had been and replace them with something else. "I don't fear it," I whispered, but the words tasted like ash in my mouth. Fear was not something that could be named here. It was a part of the landscape now, embedded in the ice, the wind, the silence. The figure's lips twitched upward in the faintest mockery of a smile. The cold surged again, a flood, a tidal wave of nothingness that rushed into every crack, every fissure in my mind. I could feel it trying to drown me, to swallow me whole. My body stiffened in response, but my will, it faltered. It was the first time since I had stepped into the tundra that I could truly feel the cold creeping into me, not just my flesh but my very essence. It was not just survival now. It was transformation. "You will become part of the Frostmaw," the figure said. "That is what this place demands. That is its price." I opened my mouth, but no words came. The cold inside me was too thick, too solid, for any protest to break through. It was suffocating, and yet strangely it felt like a part of me, an extension, not an enemy. It was familiar, comfortable even. The frost spread over my skin, creeping from the edges of my limbs to the center of my chest. I felt it press against my heart, a sharp, unyielding chill that made my breath come in shallow bursts. The figure on the throne did not move, did not speak again. It simply watched. I could feel myself changing, slipping further into something else. Was it surrender, or was it evolution? The Frostmaw was not a conqueror. It was a sculptor, an artist, slowly chipping away at everything that was weak or unnecessary, leaving only the unyielding core. I could feel it in the shifting ice beneath my feet, in the whispers carried by the wind. It wanted me to give in, to become like the statues I had seen before, still, perfect, empty. A part of me wanted to scream, to rage against it, but the anger felt so small now. The farther I walked into this place, the more I understood. Rage was a heat that couldn't survive here. It was a fleeting thing, easily frozen, easily erased. Instead, I stood there, letting the cold sink deeper into my bones. I felt myself becoming lighter, as though the frost was not merely freezing my flesh but purging everything else that had once been me. My memories began to fade, slipping from my grasp like smoke, leaving only the clarity of the moment. There was no past, no future, only now. The present was all that mattered. The Frostmaw offered only this: an eternal now, free from the burden of memory, free from the complications of emotion. It offered peace, an unbroken silence, a stillness that would not be disturbed. I felt the presence of the old woman again, though she was not there. Her voice, distant and cold, filled my mind. The Frostmaw does not demand submission. It offers transformation. It strips away everything that burdens you, everything that weakens you, until only the purest, most enduring part remains. Will you surrender, or will you fight? Surrender. The word felt right now, like the snow that gathered around me, so natural, so inevitable. The cold had become an extension of myself, a second skin, and the desire to fight was a distant, foreign thing. I stepped forward, my feet moving without conscious thought. Each step felt easier, lighter. The cold was not just in me now, it was part of me and I was part of it. There was nothing left to fear, nothing left to desire. The Frostmaw was not a place of death. It was a place of rebirth. The figure on the throne did not move as I approached. It did not need to. It was not a creature of flesh and bone, but of thought and cold, waiting patiently for me to understand. Its eyes were still mirrors, reflecting my hollow, empty gaze, and in them I saw myself, not as I was, but as I had become. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly as I touched the throne. The ice rippled beneath my fingers, as though the very act of contact made the world around me shift, change. And then, slowly, I understood. I was not just in the Frostmaw. I was the Frostmaw. I felt the pull of the land beneath me, the deep, eternal cold that radiated outward from the center of the tundra, and I felt my body align with it. My form was no longer just human. I was something else entirely, a creature shaped by ice, by wind, by the ancient power that had carved this land. I could feel the pulse of it inside me, in the very marrow of my bones, in the frost that clung to my skin. For the first time since I had arrived, I no longer felt the tug of my old self, that fragile, weak human consciousness. There was only the cold, the silence, the endless stretching tundra. And I realized this was not an end. This was a beginning. The figure on the throne turned its head slowly, its gaze never leaving me. Its reflection in the ice before me was now my reflection, empty, hollow, but somehow stronger for. "You have passed the test," it said. "You are the Frostmaw now." I didn't speak. There was no need to. I knew what I had become. I was not a statue, not a victim of the cold. I was the cold itself. The wind howled around me, but it no longer felt like an enemy. It was part of me, part of the land. The Frostmaw was a cycle, and I had become both the beginning and the end. As I stood there, the old woman's words came back to me, faint but clear. The Frostmaw doesn't need to chase. It waits. And I waited. For what? I didn't know. But in that moment, it didn't matter. The tundra was eternal, and I was a part of it now. The cold that devours the heart had consumed me completely, and in return, it had given me something far more lasting than warmth. I had become the Frostmaw, and I no longer feared the cold. At first, I thought I might still be human, still capable of feeling, of thinking, of being something separate from the tundra. But the longer I stood there, the more the distinction blurred, until I wasn't sure where I ended and the land began. The Frostmaw had seeped into my flesh, into my bones, into the very essence of who I was. I was not alive as I had been. I was something else now, something more, something less. I turned away from the throne, and the figure on it watched me with those empty, mirrored eyes. It didn't need to speak. It didn't need to move. Its presence was enough. Its gaze like a pull I couldn't resist. I stepped away from the throne and into the heart of the ruins, but there was no longer a sense of isolation. The silence had become full, complete. as though the world had been folded into itself and sealed. The shadows didn't move, but I could feel them, moving around me, through me. The wind had stopped whispering. It had become a constant hum in my ears, a low vibration that permeated everything. The statues in the ruins, those frozen figures who had once been alive, were no longer just figures. They were companions of a sort, not in any human sense, but in the way that one feels the pull of an invisible force. They were part of me and I part of them. Their stillness was a part of my stillness now. I could feel their memories, their fears, their desires. All of it fading into the ice, lost and forgotten, but still present in some inexplicable way. They had once fought the Frostmaw. Now they were it. I walked among them, my feet leaving no tracks. The snow no longer clung to me, as it had when I first arrived. Passed through me as though I was the air itself. The cold didn't just surround me, it was me. The air had become thick, viscous with the weight of all that had passed through this land. The lives lived and lost, the dreams of those who had walked before me, the memories of all who had succumbed to this eternal, waiting cold. As I passed a statue, once a man in a heavy cloak, his face twisted in agony, I felt a shudder of recognition. I knew him, or rather I knew of him. He had been one of the early travelers, the ones who had come seeking the Frostmaw's secrets. His heart had been full of pride, full of ambition. He had come to conquer it, to take from it what he believed was his right. He had failed as all who came here did. He had given himself over to the cold, just as I had. But I felt no pity for him. He had made his choice. I wondered briefly if I had ever been like him, proud, defiant, wanting to break this place open and claim whatever treasures it held. But no, that person was gone. I was the Frostmaw now, and I understood its language in ways that could never be undone. I understood its patience, its cunning. It didn't chase. It simply waited. I found myself standing at the edge of the ruins, staring out into the vast, endless expanse of the tundra. There were no more paths to follow, no more markers to seek. Everything that had driven me here, curiosity, a thirst for knowledge, the search for something I could never quite name, had evaporated in the cold. What was left of me, if anything, was a part of the land itself. I didn't feel regret, not in the way I used to. The notion of regret had become a foreign thing, an emotion as fragile as a forgotten dream. The Frostmaw had taken that from me. All that remained was a kind of peace, cold peace. In the distance, I saw a shape, another figure, emerging from the snow. At first, I thought it might be a mirage, a trick of the wind. But then I felt the pull, the compulsion to move forward. It wasn't fear. It wasn't curiosity. It was an undeniable force. A call. I stepped toward the figure. As I got closer, I saw that it was another traveler, wrapped in furs, a thick cloak draped over their shoulders. They moved with a kind of unnatural grace, their steps light, unmarked in the snow. They didn't seem to notice me at first, but when they looked up, I saw the same hollow eyes, the same mirror-gray reflection I had once seen in my own face. The travelers stopped, their gaze locking onto mine. Their lips moved, but no sound came out. It didn't matter. The language of the Frostmaw was not spoken. It was felt. The exchange was instantaneous, as though the very air around us thickened, became alive with the unspoken understanding between us. The traveler was like me now, one with the land. Their body was no longer flesh and blood. It was made of the same ice, the same frost that I was. Their movements were fluid, but detached. Empty. "You've come," they said, their voice a hollow echo in the vastness of the tundra. I nodded. I had, and now I was here, with them, with all of them. The travelers stepped closer, their presence more overwhelming than it should have been. The air around them shimmered, like a mirage in the distance. It wasn't just the cold. It was something else, a power that reached out from the depths of the tundra, threading itself through my veins, my thoughts, my very soul. "You will stay then," they said. "You will never leave." The words were not a question. They were a fact. I nodded again, though it felt like an eternity before the motion left my body. The Frostmaw had no need for words, only for understanding. And I understood now. I was not a visitor here. I was part of it. I had always been part of it even before I knew it. The Frostmaw had claimed me not just in body, but in mind, in spirit. It had stripped away the warmth, the desire, the purpose. It had taken everything that made me fragile and replaced it with something harder, colder, eternal. The traveler's eyes flickered with something, maybe recognition, maybe acceptance. Couldn't tell. But it didn't matter. I had no need to understand them anymore. I had no need for understanding at all. The Frostmaw was all that mattered now. The silence, the stillness, the patience. This was peace. This was eternity. The figure beside me turned and began to walk, and without a thought, I followed. We moved together, our footsteps silent in the snow. There was no sound but the faint hum of the wind, the whisper of time itself stretching out forever. We walked in the direction of the heart of the tundra, where no traveler had ever reached. It didn't matter. It never had. The Frostmaw waited, and I had become its servant, its chosen. And there, at the edge of the world, with the cold seeping through every pore of my being, I realized that I had not lost everything. I had not been stripped of my soul. I had simply been reborn. In the cold, I had found what I had always sought, an end to the pain, to the endless longing, a peace that could not be disturbed. I had become one with the land, and now I would wait. The world had ceased to exist beyond the Frostmaw. I had walked for what felt like days, weeks, maybe longer. Time had lost all meaning. We moved as one, the traveler beside me, silent and steady. There was no need for words. In this place, communication was an ancient language, not of speech, but of shared experience. The Frostmaw spoke to me in ways that bypassed the mind. I could feel the land shifting beneath me, the weight of eons pressing down on my shoulders, on my very soul. The landscape around us was a blur of white and black. Endless snowdrifts, jagged, frozen peaks, and the occasional glimpse of what might have once been something else. There were ruins here, too, ancient structures half buried in the ice, their shapes grotesque and distorted, like the bodies of long-dead gods. They were like the statues, like the people who had come before me. Frozen, forgotten, waiting for the cold to claim them completely. I didn't look at them anymore. I didn't need to. I had become one of them. There was no hunger now, no thirst. There was only the cold, filling every space in my mind, in my body. It had claimed me, just as it claimed everything that touched this place. I didn't miss the warmth. I didn't miss the need to feel anything. The Frostmaw had taken all of that away. What remained was clarity, a brutal, unyielding clarity. The traveler beside me turned their head toward me, their empty gaze meeting mine, though I felt no need to speak. It wasn't necessary. They had walked this path long before me, and they knew. They knew what came next. They knew what would come for me, as it had come for them. Ahead of us, a dark shape emerged from the snow, a mass of ice and stone, twisted and jagged, like the remains of some long-forgotten temple. We had reached the heart of the Frostmaw, the place where all things began, where everything that entered this land came to its end. The heart was not a place, not a physical location in any sense I had ever known. It was the center of the cold, the nexus where the Frostmaw's power was most concentrated. Here, everything converged. The souls of the lost, the whispers of those who had been consumed, the ancient pulse of the land itself. The figure beside me walked forward, and I followed. As we approached the heart, I felt something stir within me, something that might have been a memory, a fleeting flicker of who I had once been. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was more like recognition. Something primal, buried deep inside me, told me that I knew this place, that I had always known it. And then, as we passed through the shadow of the ruined temple, the cold intensified. It wrapped around me like a cloak, suffocating and soothing all at once. The land, the air, the very essence of the Frostmaw pressed in on me, forcing everything else out. The travelers stopped, their figure blending into the landscape, indistinguishable from the statues, from the ruins, from the cold itself. I stood there for a moment, alone in the heart of the Frostmaw, and the stillness was overwhelming. There were no sounds here, no wind, no movement. Just the pressure of the cold, the weight of silence, pressing against me from all sides. And then I saw it. At the center of the temple's ruins there was a shape, an altar maybe, or something older. It was impossible to tell. It seemed to pulse with a dark, unnatural energy, its surface covered in intricate patterns of frost and ice. The air around it shimmered, vibrating with an energy that wasn't cold. Exactly, but something more potent, more ancient. I walked forward, drawn by something deeper than curiosity. It wasn't a conscious decision, not one I made with thought. It was instinct. Something inside me, something that had long been buried, had been awakened by the heart of the Frostmaw. As I reached the altar, I felt it again. The same stirring deep inside me, like a flicker of life, a memory of warmth, something that had been long lost. The frost around the altar seemed to breathe, exhaling a cold, sweet breath that wrapped around me like a lover's embrace. I reached out, my fingers brushing the surface of the ice. The moment I touched it, a jolt of energy shot through me. It was like fire, but cold, a heat that burned through my very bones. I gasped, but the sound was swallowed by the silence. The power of the Frostmaw rushed through me, filling every inch of my being. I could feel it inside me, inside my mind, twisting and changing me. In that moment I understood. I was not simply one with the land. I was the land. I was the Frostmaw itself, a part of it, a vessel for its power. I had always been a part of it, always waiting for the moment when the cold would consume me completely. And now it had. I was no longer just a traveler. I was the Frostmaw, and it was me. The figure beside me, no, the traveler, was gone now, just another part of the land, a statue, a memory. There were no more questions. There were no more doubts. There was only the cold, only the stillness, only the endless waiting. I stood there, my hand resting on the altar, my mind a void of thought. I had become one with the Frostmaw, and the Frostmaw had become me. It didn't matter anymore. The land was eternal, and I was now part of it. The memories of who I had once been, of warmth, of life, faded, leaving only the clarity of cold, the purity of ice. There was nothing left to fear, nothing left to desire. The Frostmaw didn't need to chase. It had claimed me, and I had claimed it. I stood there for an eternity, though I could not say how long. Time had no meaning in the heart of the Frostmaw. There was no before, no after. There was only now, and in the now I was whole. I was the cold, and the cold was me. I stood in the heart of the Frostmaw, no longer just a traveler, no longer just human. I had become something else entirely. The cold wrapped around me, inside me, as much a part of my being as the air I breathed, or had breathed, I should say. There was no air here now. There was only the sharp, biting frost, the unyielding silence that stretched out forever, uninterrupted by time or sound. I couldn't remember the last time I had felt fear. I couldn't even remember the last time I had felt anything. The emotions I had once known, those fragile echoes of humanity, had been swept away, carried off into the endless expanse of white. They were no longer important. Nothing was important except the cold. The Frostmaw was not a place, not a single land to be explored. It was a truth, a state of being, a transformation. I had crossed its threshold, and now I was part of it, as much as the snow, the wind, the ice. I could feel the old travelers, the lost souls who had wandered here before me, their presence a faint hum in the stillness. They were not gone. They were here, and I was them. The Frostmaw didn't take lives. It remade them. Those who succumbed to it were reborn in its image. I could sense them now, all of them. The statues, the figures frozen in mid-motion, their faces empty, their minds lost to the cold. But they were not empty. Not really. They were waiting, just as I had been waiting, just as the Frostmaw had been waiting. They were frozen, yes, but they were not lost. They were part of the cycle. They were becoming. And then I realized I would not remain here forever. I had not been chosen to endure the Frostmaw's cold, for eternity just to become a statue. No, the Frostmaw didn't freeze its own. It molded them, shaped them, preparing them for the next phase of existence. I could feel it now, the purpose behind it all, the reason why the Frostmaw claimed so many, why it waited so patiently for each one to arrive. The land was not a prison. It was a forge. I could feel the weight of the world outside, the pressure of the land's ancient will, and I understood. The Frostmaw did not exist to trap me. It existed to refine me, to strip away all that was unnecessary, all that was weak, until only the core of me remained. What I had become was not a victim of the cold. I was the cold, and soon, I would be a guide, a guardian, an eternal force, watching over the next to arrive. I would call to them, lead them to their fate, and see them through the process. Just as I had been tested, so too would they be, and they would become. I turned from the altar, the cold surging through me like a river of ice. I could feel the land shifting beneath me, the subtle pulse of its power calling me forward. The Frostmaw was endless, but it was also a cycle, an eternal loop, each traveler, each soul, playing their part in the cold's grand design. I walked through the ruins, through the empty, frozen statues, feeling their eyes on me. I felt no fear now, no doubt. They had been me once. They had walked this same path. And now, like them, I would wait. I would wait for the next to come. The sky above me was endless, an expanse of frozen clouds and perpetual twilight. There was no sun here, no moon, just a dull, ever-present glow that seemed to emanate from the land itself. It was the light of the Frostmaw, a cold light that never dimmed, never faded. I walked for what felt like hours or centuries. I could no longer tell, until I reached the edge of the Frostmaw. There, the land fell away into a vast, empty abyss, a chasm where the cold stretched out into infinity. This was the edge of the world, the boundary between the land and the void. And here I saw them, the new arrivals. They had come, just as I had. They were drawn by the same pull, the same force that had called me. Their forms were indistinct, like shadows in the snow, flickering at the edge of sight. I felt their presence long before I saw them, the faintest stirrings of life in the stillness. And I felt a pang, a flicker of something. Perhaps longing, perhaps pity, but it was quickly swallowed by the cold. I was no longer the one to be pitied. I was the one who would lead. I stepped forward, my form blending with the land, becoming one with the frost. The cold was a part of me now, flowing through my veins, guiding me. I reached out to the newcomers, and they faltered, unsure, caught between the pull of the Frostmaw and their own fear. But they would come. They would always come. I stepped forward once more, feeling the ice beneath me crack and shift. The Frostmaw was not a place to conquer. It was not a destination to be reached. It was a process, a journey that no one could avoid, a transformation that would claim everyone who came here, one by one. The first of the newcomers stepped into the circle of cold, their breath visible in the air, but already, the frost had begun to creep over their skin, settling into their bones. The transformation had begun. I was no longer just a witness. I was a part of it. I was the cold that devours, the ice that molds, the stillness that waits. I would wait here forever, watching the endless parade of souls come and go, each one claiming their place in the cycle. The Frostmaw did not kill, transformed, purified. It made eternal. And as the first of the newcomers fell to their knees, succumbing to the cold, I felt no pity. I felt no sorrow. I felt only the peace of knowing what had to be done. The cycle would continue. I would guide them. I would shape them. I would become them, and they would become me. Forever. And then, as I felt the cold surge through me once more, I understood fully what the Frostmaw was. Not a place of death, but a place of rebirth. It was a forge, a crucible, an eternal process of transformation. It would claim all who entered, strip them down to their core, and remake them in its image. And so I waited,